Christopher Reeves pressed another green bottle into the wet mortar, and the town gathered to watch a fool at work.
A wall of trash. You planning to eat glass all winter, Reeves?
Christopher didn't look up. His mortar-caked hands kept turning each bottle neck inward, sealing the cavities with dark paste.
You'll starve in there, Christopher. That glass won't stop the cold.
He only paused long enough to scrape more mortar from the trough, his face weather-still and unreadable.
Elias, leave him. A man's got a right to waste his time.
Waste. It's a monument to foolishness. First hard frost will shatter every bottle.
Christopher set the next bottle into place, and the wall swallowed another piece of the afternoon light.
Your dog even looks worried.
A single snowflake landed on the glass and did not melt. The dog shifted uneasily in the sun patch, and nobody noticed the warmth still clinging to the mortar. 6 months earlier, the same hands had been empty, walking the frost-heaved dump outside town.
One green bottle, unbroken. It caught the sun.
He remembered hauling medicine bottles home the winter Clara died, how the pantry shelves had echoed.
I won't be caught empty again.
After that, he scavenged every bottle in the county, riverbanks, old campfires, the town's own refuse. By the time the first leaves turned, a mountain of dusty glass stood beside his lean-to. People crossed the street to avoid him. Children stared. He kept walking.
They don't know what hunger does to a man.
The memory of that empty winter was a fire no one else could see. So now he mortared bottles into a wall while the town called him crazy, because crazy was safer than starving. 3 months before the first frost, he had cleared the table in his shack and traced the December sun across a scrap of paper.
South-facing, 45 degrees. The old way.
Then he hauled bucket after bucket of creek sand and lime, mixing mortar in the cold until his knuckles cracked. Every bottle he found became a brick in his mind, each cavity a trap for winter light. The townsfolk saw a man collecting garbage. He saw a wall that could rewrite the season.
They burn wood. I'll burn sunlight.
He laid the first row with a plumb line, aligning the next southward like soldiers waiting for dawn. And when he set the first green bottle into the mortar, the sun struck the glass and painted his hands amber.
It holds. The glass holds.
The wall was not an invention. It was a memory of something older, something the sun already knew. By the time the first snow clung to the ground, Christopher had laid the foundation and was mortaring bottles neck inward, row by row.
That wall will fold with the first strong wind, Reeves. Glass ain't stone.
You'll freeze before it's finished. There's no fire in that mess.
He didn't answer. His trowel smoothed the dark paste around the glass, sealing the seam with the patience of a man who had learned what silence could hold.
The sun is already working. I feel it through the glass.
He knelt by the first rows and pressed his palm to the bottles. The glass was cool, but the mortar held the day's heat like a banked hearth.
Wood burns and goes cold. This stone will hold the sun until morning.
Wasting good lime on foolery. Come first, deep freeze, those bottles will pop like rifle shots.
But Christopher had sealed every bottle mouth with a plug of mortar, trapping dead air inside the cavity. An insulator older than glass itself. The wall stood half-finished, a row of dark eyes facing south, and the dog moved closer to the patch of sun that refused to fade. Before the deep snow came, he built the glassed nook and fixed it to the bottle wall.
Angle the glass to trap the low winter sun. It's the only way.
He set a stone bed inside and pressed spinach and kale seeds into the dark soil. When the first heavy snow fell, the town laughed that his bottles would shatter in the frost.
Those bottles will crack like eggshells. Then you'll have nothing but frozen glass shards.
He ran his hand over the frosted bottles. The glass was cold, but none had cracked.
The dead air inside each bottle is the real wall. Air doesn't freeze.
The dog lay on the warm stones of the nook, nose twitching at the smell of soil.
You are coddling dead dirt. Winter won't let a thing grow.
Christopher pulled the glass door shut. Outside, the snow hissed against the bottles. Inside, the seeds waited. The first hard freeze came and left. When the sun returned low, its rays poured through the bottles and filled the nook with dusty gold. In the stone bed, a thread of green pushed through the dark soil. Then another. The spinach and kale had germinated.
2 weeks earlier than any garden in the valley. The glass holds the day's heat like a closed hand.
Samuel Brody, walking home with a frozen bucket of nailed-up fish, stopped by the south-facing wall and looked in.
Would you look at that? Green things growing inside all that trash.
Don't be fooled, Samuel. It's just a warm spell. Those sprouts'll blacken with the next cloud.
Martha Cole, alone in her ice-rimed cabin, held her hands over a dying fire and watched the frost crawl across the window glass. She had seen the bottle wall from a distance, glowing faintly like a lantern buried in snow. But she could not bring herself to ask. Christopher thinned the seedlings with careful fingers, breathing on his cold knuckles. The dog watched his breath hang still in the air. The town called it luck. But Samuel Brody walked home without a word, and something had shifted behind his eyes. The snow piled higher every few days, burying the fences and the roads. But inside the nook, Christopher hung his coat on a peg.
3 more weeks of growth, and the kale will be ready to cut.
His dog sprawled on the stone floor, soaking in the sunbeam as if July had never ended.
A mountain of bottles, and not one of them keeps a neighbor warm.
He's got greens while we split the last sack of meal. I don't know what's worse, his greed or our foolish pride.
Samuel Brody stood apart, silent, his breath clouding in the cold. He had seen the green shoots himself, and could not unsee them. The snow crept up the bottle wall until only the top rows caught the sun, but the nook stayed warm.
The stone is still throwing heat at dusk. The old ones knew what they were doing.
It's a freak of weather. Wait till the real winter sets in. That glass house will be his tomb.
But Christopher only glanced at the gray sky and drew his coat back on, knowing the real test had yet to come. The blizzard hit before dawn with a hammering wind that shook the lean-to and made the bottle wall cry out in 100 small notes. Christopher sat in the dark of the nook, listening. The dog leaned against his leg, and the glass glowed only with the memory of the previous day.
The bottles are shaking, but not cracking. The mortar is holding.
Outside, the wind screamed across the ridge, but the wall groaned once and then fell silent, sealed by the pressure of the storm itself. When the sun returned in the morning, the nook was still warm, the spinach unruffled, the kale still reaching upward.
Not a single bottle broke. The wall does more than hold heat. It holds steady.
He knelt by the stone bed and cut a handful of kale with the care of a man harvesting gold. The basket filled with dark green leaves that smelled of life, while the rest of the valley opened tins of salt pork. In the town, fires had burned low through the night, and the cold crept into beds. No one saw Christopher eat his breakfast in the sun. He chewed the raw kale slowly, watching the sun climb, and understood that the real winter had not yet begun to test him. The days turned gray and sunless, the low clouds sealing the valley in a lid of iron. But inside the nook, the spinach leaves never wilted. The stone floor held the heat of the previous afternoon, as if the sun had never left. At night, Christopher pressed his palm against the dark mortar and felt the warmth still breathing out of the wall.
The mortar drank the sun for hours. Now it's giving it back. They'll never understand stone.
In the settlement, the pantries were thinning. The trading post ran out of flour, then beans, then the last sack of oats. Elias Whitfield broke the ice on his water barrel and found only half a moldy salt pork left in the crock. Christopher stacked firewood beside the bottle wall that he never needed to burn.
Wood is for cooking. The wall heats itself. If they knew, they'd tear it apart with their bare hands.
Martha Cole's children chewed on leather straps to quiet their stomachs and still the bottle wall gave no sign of failing. At dawn, the gray clouds broke for a single hour, and the wall drank the light like a man drowning in a desert. But the brief sun was a lie. The whiteout closed again before noon and did not lift for 3 days. In the cabins, the last logs crumbled to ash, and the cold seeped into every bed. Elias Whitfield stood at his frozen window, pipe unlit, and watched the bottle wall glowing through the snow. Through the blizzard, the bottle wall breathed stored warmth into the nook, invisible and inexhaustible. On the 3rd day, with the children silent and the salt pork gone, Martha Cole stumbled toward the bottle wall, her frozen knuckles rapped against the frosted glass.
Christopher, I know you are in there. My children haven't eaten in 3 days.
The door opened a crack. Warm air, smelling of earth, spilled into the frozen air.
What? What is this? Greens? In the middle of winter?
Christopher stepped aside, and Martha Cole saw the impossible. A garden of life blooming inside a wall of trash.
A garden. Spinach, kale. My children are starving, Christopher. How is this possible?
He didn't answer. He pulled the door wide and gestured her into the warmth that smelled of earth and growing things. She stepped inside and touched a spinach leaf, as if afraid it would dissolve.
Take what you can carry, but you tell no one.
She filled her shawl with kale, weeping quietly, and he pressed a handful of seeds into her palm.
If the town swarms this place, it'll be stripped in an hour. Swear it.
She swore, and the cold swallowed her back into the blizzard. But by the next morning, a thin boy had pressed his face against the bottles, staring at the impossible green inside. A whisper ran along the street. There was a garden growing inside the wall of trash. By noon, a line of desperate faces gathered at the frost-rimed glass, eyes wide with hunger and something like hope, and the dog whined from inside the nook. The first fists pounded on the door before he could think. Christopher wrapped the dog's leash around his wrist and pulled the bolt. A woman held out a tin cup. A man showed a handful of nails. Their eyes were hollow.
I'll trade a bundle of greens for a fair coin, or a day's labor when spring comes. That's the rule.
The coins that crossed his palm were thin and cold, the last pennies of a starving settlement. Samuel Brody shouldered through the crowd, shame folding his face into hard lines. In his fist, a broken pocket watch.
This was my father's. It stopped working years ago. It's all I have worth trading.
Christopher took the watch, placed it on the warm stone inside the nook, and handed Samuel a heavy bundle of kale. Across the street, Elias Whitfield stood on his porch, pipe unlit, watching the line of desperate men trade their dignity for leaves. He did not move. His pride was the last fire left to him, and it was burning low, and the bottle wall glowed on, indifferent to the commerce it had birthed, while the dog guarded the green world inside. At dusk, 2 men with empty eyes and thin coats came around the side of the bottle wall, testing the mortar with their fingers. The dog lifted its head from the warm stones and growled low, a sound that never left its throat. Christopher grabbed the mattock from beneath the seat bench and stepped into the cold doorway before the lock could splinter.
Touch my wall again, and you'll leave with less than you came with.
The dog's snarl broke the silence, teeth bared at the frozen air between them.
You leave now, or the next season you plant is underground.
The 2 men stumbled backward into the snow, cursing, but the hunger in their eyes did not fade. He bolted the door and leaned against the wall, breathing hard. The spinach rustled in the stillness.
I can't hold them off forever. They'll come at night, or in a pack. I have to give them the method.
He looked at the glowing bottles, the stone bed, the dog watching him, and understood that holding the secret would cost more than giving it away. The next morning, Christopher unlatched the door and faced the crowd with the mattock still in his grip.
I won't give away the greens, but I'll show you how to build your own wall.
The crowd murmured. A few hands tightened on empty cups. One man swore under his breath.
I'll learn. Show me what to do.
Reluctant nods spread through the line. A woman lowered her shawl. A man put away his knife.
Teach them to waste lime and glass. What'll you charge for that lesson?
Labor and a promise not to steal. That's the only coin I'll take.
Samuel Brody stepped forward, his broken watch still hanging in the nook, and stood beside Christopher. By the time the sun broke through the gray, a dozen men and women had gathered around the bottle wall, ready to learn. Elias Whitfield remained on his porch, but his pipe had gone cold, and he did not go inside. They broke ground at Samuel's cabin the next morning, a dozen hands clearing snow from the south-facing wall.
Angle the bottlenecks 45 degrees south. Seal the mouth tight with mortar. Dead air is the insulator.
Samuel mixed the lime and sand with frozen fingers, while women brought armloads of dusty bottles from the dump. Elias Whitfield appeared at midday, standing at the edge of the work with his arms crossed.
You here to help, Elias, or just to judge?
Elias said nothing, but he did not leave. His eyes followed every trowel stroke. The new wall rose fast, a knee-high line of green and amber glass, its necks staring south like a row of dark pupils.
There's catching on. Once the sun hits this mortar, they'll feel the heat for themselves.
The low afternoon sun broke through the clouds, and the bottles lit up like dirty lanterns, throwing warm light onto the snow. And Elias Whitfield, for the first time in a long winter, stepped forward to touch the glass. Elias let his hand rest on the glass a moment longer before stepping back. The work continued without him. By the next snowfall, Samuel had rigged a canvas lean-to against the half-finished wall, and the air inside already felt different. He knelt and pressed a few borrowed seeds into a stone bed, not really believing they would grow, but needing to try. Elias Whitfield's cabin was dark. The last split log crumbled to embers, and the cold had crept into his bones. He put on his coat and walked across the snow, the ice crunching like broken glass under his boots.
Reeves, I've got nothing left to burn but my pride. Will you show me?
The old man's voice cracked like dried leather, and something shifted in the frozen space between them. Christopher placed a cold trowel in Elias's hand. The man who had mocked glass now held the tool that shaped it.
He's finally choosing survival over pride. That's the first lesson the sun teaches.
And the two men stood before the glass wall, not as rivals, but as students of the same ancient light. Weeks passed, and the settlement that had called him crazy began to look like a different village. Martha Cole, with seeds from Christopher's hand, mortared a small wall against her own cabin and watched the first green push through.
It's working. The sun is feeding us.
Elias Whitfield, silent now, walked the rows of his own completed wall, pressing a thumb into the dry mortar.
50 years I judged and never learned what a bottle could do.
Christopher moved between the walls, teaching the angle and the seal, his dog following at his heel.
They're building faster than I ever could. The idea travels like fire.
By late winter, the valley was dotted with bottle walls glowing amber at dusk, and the air inside them smelled of life. The trash wall that had been mocked now stood as the first monument of a different kind of survival. And in Christopher's nook, the dog still slept in the sunbeam, but the warmth was no longer a secret. A fur trader hauling salt from the low pass stopped his sled before the bottle walls and simply stared. He asked a woman carrying kale if this was a town that heated itself with old glass. Christopher stepped from the nook, wiping the dark mortar from his hands. The trader reached for a purse, offering coin for the knowledge. Christopher shook his head. He crouched and drew the sun's arc in the snow with a stick, the bottles glowing behind him. The trader watched, copying the sketch into a leather notebook.
I didn't invent this. The ancients angled their walls like this, and I only refused to be too proud to try.
The trader looked at the wall with new eyes, seeing it not as junk, but as a device as old as civilization. He offered payment again, but Christopher pressed the diagram into his hand instead. The sled creaked eastward, and the story of the bottle wall moved with it into the wider world. That evening, warmth holding in the stone floor, Christopher laid the old leather book on the bench between them. He opened it to pages yellowed with age, diagrams of sun traps and thermal walls drawn by hands long dead. Elias Whitfield leaned forward, his wrinkled fingers hovering over the ink lines.
A south-facing wall, angled to the winter sun. The stone stores the day's heat.
I didn't invent anything. I only refused to be too proud to try what the dead already knew.
The answer was never in glass or mortar. It was in a different kind of seeing.
Samuel traced the diagram with a thick finger and nodded slowly, the truth settling like a seed in good soil. Christopher closed the book softly, and the bottle wall behind them glowed like a page from the same ancient story. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the dog settling onto the warm stones and the wall of old glass bottles. Once a monument to foolishness, became, in that silence, a testament to humility. The first warm wind came in under the clouds, and the snow that had buried the settlement began to pull back from the bottle walls. Christopher's original wall stood unaltered, the mortar dry and solid, the bottles still catching the low sun. Neighbors he had never spoken to came to his door with small pouches of seed, offerings, not trade.
I planted alone last year. This year, the whole valley plants with me.
He knelt in the stone bed, fingers pressing new kale seeds into the thawed earth, while children watched from the doorway. The dog wagged in the sunbeam that had never gone cold all winter. The village that had mocked him now wore its bottle walls like badges, amber lit at dusk. The trash wall was gone. In its place stood a landmark, and the man who built it was no longer a crank.
It was never about proving them wrong. It was about planting something that would outlast the frost.
And in the quiet of the returning sun, the bottle wall stood as proof that even the discarded could be redeemed. In the nook at dusk, Christopher read by candlelight. The dog slept on the warm stones beside him. He closed the book and looked at the bottle wall, still radiating the faint heat of the day's sun. Outside, the village was quiet, but smoke rose from many chimneys, not from desperate fires, but from cook stoves. The wall glowed faintly amber, a quiet testimony to the winter that had tried to bury them and failed. He reached out and laid his palm against the glass, feeling the stored warmth seep into his hand.
It's still holding. The sun won't let go.
The dog stirred, then settled again, and the candle flickered in the silent nook. He leaned back against the stone bed, looking up through the glass roof at the first stars. A faint smile crossed his face, not of triumph, but of quiet understanding, and the bottle wall, unremarkable and ancient in its wisdom, glowed on through the night. The spring thaw came late, but it came, and the snowbanks melted into the creek beds, where the whiteout had once sealed the world. Green things pushed through the mud. The bottle walls stood against the hillside, no longer mocked, but simply useful, a part of the valley now. Christopher Reeves walked the edge of his property, the dog at his heel, watching the new light. Children ran past the glowing glass without fear, and Elias Whitfield nodded from his porch, a pipe finally lit. Martha Cole's wall held a second planting, her children helping her press the seeds into the soil. The dog stretched in the sunbeam, now warm in spring, and wagged its tail lazily. The sun set behind the bottle wall, painting the last patches of snow in colors of amber and rose. Christopher Reeves never called himself a builder. He only refused to be too proud to learn from those who came before, and that, in the end, fed them all.